The micro view, what's a house worth? So we went from the national to the macro to the sub-market to a house. We're looking at the numbers of a house. What is a house worth? Well, there are basically 3 acceptable valuation methods in the real estate business. 3 proven, acceptable methods. If you use pretty much anything other than these 3, people will look at you like you're insane. Okay. So they are, 1, the comparable sales method, comps. 2, the income approach, looking at the income of a property. Or 3, the replacement value. Okay? This is basic appraisal school stuff. Only 3 ways to look at the property. Okay? So for 1 to 4 family residential, that's single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex, the acceptable method is comparable sales, comps. For 5 family and commercial, you're going to rely on number 2, although a commercial appraisal will consider all 3, they heavily, like 90%, weighted on the income approach. They'll say in a commercial, if you really want to get a lesson in value, read a commercial appraisal. It's like 2 inches thick. But it's really, really good. Commercial appraisers are really sharp guys. Gals, whatever. They look at all 3, but they heavily rely on the income approach. Okay, whereas comparable sales, you do get an appraisal on a residential property, even if it's a rental property, they're not going to do the income approach or the replacement value, or they may talk about price per square foot replacement, like very briefly or something like that, but they're going to rely heavily. So even if you have a duplex, you go to a bank and borrow money, they're going to do an appraisal based on comps of what the value is of the duplex, or what's each unit worth. Up to 4 units. Up to 5 and over, they do the income approach. Or if it's commercial, they'll do the income approach. And we're talking about the math behind that. That's where we get heavy into the math, the fun stuff. Okay, so 4 unacceptable valuation methods. Zillow. Averaging websites, that's my favorite. I love getting an email saying, Zillow says it's worth this. eAppraisal.com says it's worth that. And Trulia says it's worth this. So if we average the 3, we get a good number. What's the old expression in computers? Garbage in, garbage out. That's not an acceptable valuation method. The tax assessed value, what the county says, not an acceptable valuation. Although in some areas, like I was helping a client put together an estate plan. He had a lot of properties in Texas. And we're trying to figure out, without doing an appraisal, and he's got a lot of $50,000 properties. He's got like 100 of them. So we're trying to figure out for estate planning, divvying it up and gifting it between kids and grandkids, you have to get a value for the IRS. Otherwise, they're going to challenge you on it. Well, what's the cost of, a $50,000 house still costs $400 or $500 for an appraisal. So we're looking at 40, 50 grand in appraisals, and he just didn't want to pay that. So his CPA said, it's the law in Texas that the county valuation must be the exact market value. He goes, what do you think? Can I just use that for the IRS? Because that's the law. And I said, that's a pretty good argument. That's a pretty damn good argument. Even though it might not be accurate, it's supposed to be accurate. But generally speaking, tax assessed value is not a real value. I would look at it, see what the formula is that the county calculates the valuation at. And sometimes you can get the relationship between land and structure that way. Like in a subdivision, like where I live in a golf course community. So there's a huge premium for being on the golf course versus being across the street. Huge. It's like being on the beach and not being on the beach. Not quite as much, but. So when I wanted to figure out what my house is worth on the golf course versus the guy across the street just sold, I looked at the land value assessment, what the county assessed the land at, and looked at the difference between lot value assessment, and came up to a pretty close estimation of the market value of mine versus his, because there was no houses on that were on the golf course that have sold, so I'm trying to comp my house and figure it out. I came to a pretty close valuation, but generally speaking, tax assessed value, don't pay attention to it. It's not a real number. Price per square foot times number of feet. That is the moron method. That's what realtors try to trick you with. Price per square foot is 300, so there's 1,000 square feet, so it's got to be worth 300,000, right? No. There's no basis in reality for that. There's no such thing. Contractors use price per square foot to bid. That's a good rule of thumb. But even if you were a contractor, would you go and give a formal bid to build a major project without putting a spreadsheet to everything that went into that construction? Of course you wouldn't. You wouldn't rely on price per square foot. That's just a ballpark. Okay? So none of these are really acceptable valuation methods, and you shouldn't use them. I know a lot of people do, but it's wrong. Okay? Especially with condos. I love that. But brokers love to con you and say, well, the price per square foot in this condo development is $200. So this one's 1,000 square feet, and this one's 1,500, so this one's 50% more. But they're both 2 bedrooms. Are they worth? Is this one worth 50% more? No, it's not worth 50% more. It may not even be worth any more. Okay. So let's go into the nitty-gritty of comps. There are 6 factors that go into comps. Okay. So basically, we start with location. That's the number one factor that goes into comps. So the closer to the subject property, the more relevant the comp. Okay, so within a mile, technically, is the rule. That's what appraisal school says you can go up to a mile, but that's not reality. In rural areas like Conifer, maybe. But a mile is a long way. Look at Manhattan. That's like the difference between Chinatown and Midtown. That's not even the same zip code, right? There's a lot of zip codes in Manhattan. Same subdivision, same block would be better, but generally within the same subdivision is acceptable as a comp, as the best comp. Okay. If not, then they can jump to another subdivision that's contiguous or close by that is similar. But I've argued with appraisers. I had appraisers screw me and say, there's 3 comps in the subdivision. 2 of them were short sales. I'm going to use those 2, and then the one that's sold normal. And I said, but if you go to the next subdivision, which is literally 300 yards. And there's no fence in between it. It's just all contiguous. We're talking about North Aurora here, 80010. There's 4 subdivisions in there. Does anybody know what they are? No, it's all North Aurora. It's all the same area. There's 4 subdivisions within it, right? So he said, no, I can't go out of the subdivision. Subdivision was only like 8 blocks wide by 10 blocks north. That's the size of the subdivision we're talking about. He wouldn't go 8 blocks over in the same zip code to comp a house. He used 2 short sales within the same subdivision. So that's how strict these appraisers can be. But I think that's stupid. I mean, because you don't use, if you want to compare, you need to see clean sales. Someone who sold their home on the open market of the MLS that was in good condition to an owner-occupant who got a loan. That's a clean sale. A short sale, a foreclosure sale, an estate sale, an owner carry, those are not comparable because they're not, arm's length, lender involved, appraiser, broker, and everything. That's which one we're looking at. Clean sales. Okay? So same subdivision or similar subdivision. Location is the most important. Size and rooms is the second most important thing. Okay, so square footage, in order to be comparable, a lot of people don't realize this, the subject property and the one you're comparing to must be within 20% of square footage to be comparable. Now, we don't compare price per square foot, remember? We do compare bedrooms is what we compare. 2 to a 2, 3 to a 3, or 3 to a 4. 2 to 3 is a tough comparison because the biggest jump in value is between 2 and 3 bedrooms. So you can compare 1s and 2s, 3s and 4s, but 2s to 4s or 2s to 3s are really tough to comp because there's such a big jump in value between 2 and 3 bedrooms. Now, if you've got a 2-1, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, you say 2, 2, those are the same, and then we adjust the difference for the bathroom of $1 amount. Does that make sense? As same thing with 3 to 4 bedroom, we adjust for the extra or lack of bedroom, or garage, or X, Y, and Z that's there or not there. Does that make sense? So to be comparable, they have to be within 20% square foot. Now here's where it gets tricky. Let's say you've got a house that is 1,000 square foot ranch. Okay? And this one sold right across the street very recently for $100,000. I know when I say $100,000, you go, what $100,000 house? I'm using round numbers because some people are averse to math. So that's price per square foot, $100, right? Real simple. And by the way, this is a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, 1-car garage, 311. Okay? So now across the street is your house, and your house is 1,500 square feet, same configuration, everything else is the same. 3-bedroom, 1-bath, blah, blah, blah. How do we compare them? We can't, because they're more than 20% difference in square footage. They're not comparable. Does that make sense? Probably that extra 500 square foot could make it into a 4-bedroom and 2 baths. So it's really not comparable. Now, what if it was 1,200 square foot? Was that within 20%? Yes. What's the difference in value? This is $100 a square foot, so dummy school would say this one's worth what? 120. But the truth is, these houses are worth exactly the same. Exactly the same. There's no difference in value. Because they're within 20%, so they're comparable. They're the same 311, in the same neighborhood, the same style. They're all the same. Unless that other 200 square foot is something substantial. Like it's a laundry room. Is a laundry room worth 20 grand? Hell no. It's maybe worth 3 grand. So maybe there's a 3 grand difference. Or maybe the smaller one, no, there's still 311. All the same. Maybe the 1,000 square foot ranch had a real small, tight kitchen, and the one that's 1,200 square foot had a beautiful kitchen. All right, maybe that's worth 5 grand more. But it's not worth 20% more. You everyone understand that?
I think an appraiser would give you maybe 5%. Yeah.
Maybe 5%, right. They're not going to give you much. You know, and usually the difference between these two is the size of the den or the size of the bedrooms, which translates to no change in value. No change in value. If, like I said, if it's a bigger kitchen, if it's a laundry room, if it's something substantial that really makes the house more functional, you'll get a little bit. But most times, you know, they'll appraise out the same, you know, within 20%. So don't fall into that trap of price per square foot. They are comparable. Okay. So number 3, style and age. Okay. So there's less than 50s. You know, so 40s, 30s, 20s, 1900. 1620, well, I don't know, maybe that's a little different. You go to New Hampshire, you get houses in the 1700s. Most of them have been updated at some point. And that's what really counts. You know, it's not the year built, it's the year it was updated. Okay? So if you take a house from the 30s that was gutted and redro- you know, lath and plaster were all removed and you went to drywall, they upgraded the electric plumbing like a year ago, it's a new house. You treat it as a new house. Okay, so if it's less than 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, they're all comparable. Because they all suck. They have bad plumbing, they have bad wiring, they have a lath and plaster, they're horrible. They're horrible to deal with. Okay, that's why I generally tell newer investors to fix and flips, stick to the 50s and newer because that's when code went more uniform. And, you know, things were a lot easier to deal with. 50s and 60s are comparable. 70s and 80s things changed. Actually, the quality went down in most neighborhoods. You know, they had a crappy construction quality, a lot of foundation problems. The houses built in the 50s and 60s are rocks, except with a few exceptions. The houses built in the 70s and 80s were really crap. They slapped those things together. What's that stuff they put on the outside called, like TB100 or what's that? So it looks like paneling.
It is
TD100. There's like what is it? Do you know what it's called? I forgot that finish.
T111 siding.
T111 siding. Yeah, that crappy stuff. That's what I'm talking about. That's all comparable. And in 90s and newer, you know, up till now is fairly comparable because the styles have not changed drastically from the 90s. And construction materials haven't drastically changed from the 90s. But again, a 1930 house that was updated in 95 would be a 95 house. Does that make sense? And style, we want to compare style to style. Because, and it depends on what part of the country you're in, by the way. In most parts of the country, colonial homes are the most valuable. That's the bedrooms upstairs. Walk in on the main floor, bedrooms upstairs. That's the most valuable house. In some parts of the country, like in Arizona, they don't like those because they get hot upstairs. They like ranches with a walkout because they're cooler. They put the bedroom a lot of times downstairs. So that's different, the higher priority. Or senior communities like ranches, you know, better than 2 stories because they can't walk the stairs. Generally speaking, the pecking order is the colonials are the highest, and the funky homes like Capes, those are the ones with like a real small ranch, and then they get this like curl-up attic up there with the windows that come out, the gable, and the Igor lives upstairs with the gimp. You know, it's real bad. Bi-levels, especially bi-levels where the bedrooms are on the lower floor, tend to be worth on the lower end of value. And ranches and colonials tend to be on the upper end of value. So just make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Okay, so if you have a house that's the same square footage, same bedrooms, baths, same everything, and you're comparing a colonial 2-story to a bi-level with the bedrooms in the basement, that's not comparable. There could be a $50,000 to $60,000 change in value, even though it's the same square footage. So you want to compare the best you can style to style. Okay? Number 4, finishes. So an appraiser is going to look at finishes, and the same thing you would do is they're going to look at how recently was it updated. And they rate it based upon neighborhoods. So they have like A, B, C, D, and then they have like A1, A2, A3, lower number. The higher the number, the lower the quality. Does that make sense? And so they're trying to compare. Now this isn't, again, this is in the 4th factor. This is where it becomes a little less relevant, and the number's not going to change a lot here. So if you have 2 comparable houses, one was updated with linoleum and used appliances, and the other one has old linoleum and older appliances, there's not going to be a substantial difference. But if one is linoleum floors, brown carpet, paneling on the walls, and then the other house you're comparing it to was gutted to the nines, it's got stainless steel, there's going to be a difference in finish. Okay? And so they'll look at the quality update, but again, it's still fairly marginal at that point. Once you get past location, style, size, bedrooms and baths, these last 3 are marginal differences. Okay? The age of the comps. Technically, a comparable sale must be within 6 months. Technically, it has to be in the past, but I think that's stupid. Because again, if the market is rising or the market is falling, what do I want to look at? What is for sale? That's my competition, especially if I'm going to flip it. When I rent it, I don't really care. I just need to look at comps so I can get an appraisal from a bank. Okay? But if you're looking forward, like what am I going to sell this for in 3 months? The comps from January are not that relevant to June or August when you're going to resell it. You want to see what's for sale now or what's under contract now, because even though that technically an appraiser wouldn't look at that, you want to look at that because that's what you're competing with. Does that make sense? That's the difference between an appraisal and a broker's price opinion. A broker's price opinion looks at what's behind you and what's for sale. An appraiser only looks at what's behind you and then makes a couple of notations about the market in there somewhere. That's why appraisals, they're only good to a point, especially in a market like we're in now where things are moving up. Age versus proximity. That's the age-old argument that appraisers argue about. Which is more relevant? A house across the street that sold a year ago, or a house that sold a month ago in another subdivision? Well, technically, if it's older than 6 months, you can't even consider the one across the street. Would you consider the one across the street if it was just like yours across the street? Especially a condo. Where would you rather look for a comp? Across the hall, a year old, or in another condo division a half-mile away and it sold last week? That's not that relevant. I can extrapolate, this one was a year ago and now the values are 10% higher. I'll just take that one and add 10%. I think logically that makes sense, doesn't it? So, age versus proximity I think proximity is the more important thing. That's why it's number 1. Location. Okay? And the last thing is conformity. So, does it have bedrooms or baths in the attic or in the basement, funky additions, low ceilings, things like that? You have to compare those, apples to apples. Without a doubt, whenever I go through this, it's not complete without a discussion of basements. So let me talk for 5 minutes about basements, and then we'll break for lunch. So, basements are a tough one, but I'll give you a kind of a rule of thumb. This was taught to me by an old appraiser. Basically, if you've got, here's the main floor. Looks like a mobile home. Okay, so let's say this is 1,000 square feet ranch, just like we talked about before, and it's a 2-1. Okay, and let's say this is worth 100 grand. It's got a basement below grade, not a walkout, which is also 1,000 square feet, and it's empty. It's not finished. What is it worth? General rule of thumb is 25% of this number. The basement unfinished is worth 25% of the main floor, generally speaking. If it's low ceilings, or it's like really old and there's like, bricks falling out, and it's like really old, and you have to duck under to get down there, and it's got a poor header, it's going to be less. But a standard 50s or newer house, it's about 25% of the main floor. Okay, unfinished. If we finish it, and no, I'm not talking about popping out egress windows and making that. I'm just trying to finish it. At, similar to the main floor, quality. Maybe pop in a couple of rooms, a den, a theater, whatever. Okay? then it's worth not much more. It's worth about 35 to 40% depending on the finish and quality and whether it's a walkout and how high the ceilings are. You see, it's not much difference. So generally speaking, if you have a house like this, should you finish the basement in this price range? No. You won't get your money back. Now, here's the difference. Let's say I put in another 2 bedrooms and 1 bath that are conforming, meaning to code. Because you can have, like, if you have bedrooms that are down in that basement that were done before you got it, and they had little bitty windows, okay? Those are not conforming. So an appraiser can't consider them bedrooms. He just looks at it as finished square feet according to this formula. Does that make sense? Now for rental purposes, though, it's a different story. For rental purposes, if this has a 2-1 in the basement, even if they're non-conforming bedrooms, and you have 2-1 upstairs, you've got a 4-2 for rental purposes. Renters don't know the difference between, oh, does that have an egress window? Is that the code? No, they just know how many kids they got and how many bedrooms it has. That's all I care about. Okay? So for rental purposes, would it be worth finishing it if you were going to rent it? Maybe. But for resale, if I went and put 2 bedrooms and 1 bath in the basement, okay, and that, let's say it took up this much, and then the rest of it was just finished, like, open, just carpet paint, just nicely finished, maybe a wet bar. Those 2 bedrooms and 1 bath, if they have full egress windows, they've done the code and everything's clean, and that bathroom was done permitted and everything, what I've got now is a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. And an appraiser can compare that to another 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. Now, is it worth the same as a 4-2 where everything's on the main floor? No. There's a difference, but he can compare them. He can adjust for the differences, but he can compare them. Does that make sense? You can't, for appraisal purposes, call this a 4-2 unless those bedrooms are conforming to code. What is the rest of this worth then? The rest of this is just worth that 35% or so. So he'll take the finished square foot that's not bedrooms and baths, call that 35% of the main floor, and then add the value of the 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and call it 4-2 plus the finished area. Everybody follow that? I know and there's a million exceptions to this, by the way. This is just a rule of thumb. Because if it's a walkout, and it's got a, my basement has I got a view of Pikes Peak from my basement. Because it's a walkout, and it's on like a slope, so I can see Pikes Peak from my. That's obviously worth more than this thing underground, where I have a view of spiders. Okay? So that's different. And in a place like, really hot, like Phoenix, huge premium for that below ground space because it's cooler. Does that make sense? They build houses specifically that way, where you walk in on the main floor, and then the lot slopes down, and then you walk out on the basement of the back edge, so the ground floor is just as nice as the main floor. That's different. There's going to be a much bigger number than 35 to 40%. It might even be close to dollar for dollar. But generally speaking, that's your formula for garages. Garages are worth building generally, if you don't have to move a lot of dirt. If you don't have a garage, that is. Because you can knock out a garage 8 to 12 grand, and you'll get 8 to 12 grand or more. Plus, you'll make your house much more marketable because people want a garage, especially in a state like ours where it hails all the time. People want a garage. If you've got a 2-bedroom, 1 bath with an attached garage, which is worth more, the garage or converting that into a 3-bedroom? That's a tough one.
Worth looking at.
Depends on the house. Depends on the neighborhood. Generally speaking, you'll get more value out of the bedroom than you will out of the garage. Now, especially if you can build a carport or a garage on the back of the property, now you're really in business. Because you'll get more than 10 grand in value than it'll cost you for the new garage than it would to build another bedroom that's an addition on the house. Does that make sense? Especially if it's only a 2. If it was a 3-bedroom, would it make sense to have a garage or a 4th bedroom? Probably the garage would be worth pretty close. Be pretty close. Right? Garages are premiums.
I hadn't really thought through that, but years ago it seems like if your house, like this example, $100,000 house, it still cost $10,000 to build a garage, so it wasn't really worth it. But now that same house is
$200,000
or whatever,
right,
and
exactly.
people are like, oh yeah, I'll pay that.
It's also a marketability thing. It's not appraisal value. It's marketability, like how fast or how clean it's going to sell. So you have to look at the neighborhood. Bobby and I used to do a bus tour. We used to go up and down and look at houses and walk you through houses. One time we were doing it and someone asked about the driveway, which was all cracked up. They go, oh, well, you didn't estimate for the driveway. So I took them by the head and I said, Look down the block that way, look down the block that way. What do you see? Crack, 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 crack. And I wasn't even talking about the driveways. All the driveways are cracked. So if everybody's driveway is cracked, you don't replace your driveway. Does that make sense? But if, like I said, if nobody has a garage, then you really don't need a garage. It's not really worth it. But if 90% of the houses in the block have a garage, you know it's going to hurt your resale value. People just don't want it. They're not going to buy it. So you have to do the garage. And likewise, maybe with a basement. If everybody in the neighborhood has a finished basement, all your competition has finished basements, you're going to have to price it substantially lower, or you're going to have to compete.